The Pokemon series has been around for longer than, well, longer than me, and throughout that time it has changed and developed and grown into something so different, and yet so familiar to what we've always known. The newest entry into the franchise is Pokemon Scarlet and Violet, more divisive than Marmite, and sure to turn my Switch into a mini heater. This was the first time that a traditional Pokemon story was thrown into an open world setting. This open world gameplay was amazing in Legends Arceus. In a world that is inhabited with a huge variety of wild monsters, it only makes sense to let the player run around adventuring and discovering new areas with new Pokemon. The big problem though is that while this game is amazingly atmospheric and beautiful, this game's camera is currently stuck in the floor. Scarlet and Violet do a lot of things right and are genuinely enjoyable experiences. The fact that it's experimenting with some of the core gameplay mechanics to try and help the series fit in with modern games is fantastic. But holy sh**, what was going on during the development of this game? It runs horribly, half the city's textures are in 144p, and some of the Pokemon aren't even spawning as the right colour. Oh shoot, never mind, that's a shiny. So, as I was saying, this has got to be the greatest Pokemon game of all time. The main story of the game has really been shaken up this time around. Rather than having one linear story to follow, like most other Pokemon games have always had, now you get to take control of what you want to do, and when you want to do it. The main problem though is that you're kind of still forced into doing them in somewhat of a vague order, because there is no level scaling. This means that you either have to do things roughly in the order they want you to do them in, and get the full experience out of the game, or you'll find some obstacles much harder than they really should be, then end up becoming way too overleveled and bulldoze your way throughout the rest of the game. It really feels like Game Freak should have committed to either having more of a structured adventure in this open world, or maybe let things like the gym Pokemon's levels scale according to how far you are within the story. Neither of these will take away from the open world aspect of the game, and at least this way I won't feel like some kind of demigod annihilating every single Pokemon in my way. For some reason, this game, and the entire region, seems to revolve around a gigantic school. I honestly didn't really care about any of the school themes, partially because a lot of it was clearly aimed at people that are still in school, which is not me, but mainly because any of the time I spent there felt like an A-clicking simulator. Just miles and miles of text to set up a story, going through different rooms, and turn into religion in hopes that you don't forget any of the information that's just been dumped on you. This would have been a fantastic chance for Pokemon to introduce some voice acting into the games. It wouldn't really feel out of place now that it's a big open world, and since each game gets more text heavy, it would definitely help with the game flow a bit. A lot of the actual lore and story of the main characters is right near the end, where I'm walking down a slope for about 30 minutes. Hearing the characters talk to each other here would have been amazing, but I don't know, I guess it just wasn't in their budget. There are 3 main plot lines for you to play through: Victory Road, Operation Starfall, and Path of Legends. Victory Road is the classic beat 8 gyms, then 4 weirdos, then the champion. But this time it feels like much more of an adventure, since instead of following the set routes to get to the next town, you sometimes have to do some actual exploring to find your way there. All of the gym leaders are really fun too, and it's so cool to see things like a doubles battle. The one issue I feel this storyline has, however, is that there aren't really many obstacles in your way. You just grind up your Pokemon and beat each gym. In many of the previous games, some of the gyms will have a mini plotline to follow before you can challenge it. One of my favourites being Olivine City's gym, where the gym leader is away because she's looking after an Ampharos, who you need to find medicine for so that it can feel better, and Jasmine doesn't have to spend time looking after it anymore, freeing her up to finally have a Pokemon battle, and in Scarlet and Violet I have to push around a giant olive before I can face the gym. Other than a lot of these tests being pointless and ridiculously easy, it feels like they just take away from the story rather than add to it. Some of them aren't too bad and actually make a bit of sense, but a lot of them seem to be filler to avoid coming up with anything interesting to do. Why do I have to push around an olive before I can fight the gym leader? What does this prove? Other than, I'll buy anything with the word Pokemon in the title, apparently. Operation Starfall is the villain story of the game, and I'm honestly in 2 minds about this one. I'm such a huge fan of the villain teams being genuinely evil, and having some sort of devious plot to take over the region, and the entire plot here is that some of the school kids are being bullied, so they ran away, formed a f***ing team, and began dressing like background characters in High School Musical Remake. Half of what they say just doesn't really feel like it lands properly, and there is absolutely nothing that makes me want to beat them. Every time they say this, I lose a few IQ points. However, finding and beating the bases out in the wild was genuinely pretty fun. Instead of beating clones of the same 3 grunts as usual, we get to run around with a few of our Pokemon to beat 30 of theirs. This is a fun way of doing it that really takes advantage of the new open world mechanics. But what really takes the cake is fighting the base leader. They'll start off normally, but after you beat their standard Pokemon, it's time to take on their entire car for some reason. This is all wacky good fun for the first couple of bases. In total there are 5-star bases and none of them differ from each other in any way other than what type they specialise in. You'll always have to beat 30 enemies, then take on the base leader and their Starmobile. I really think this could have been varied a bit between bases. Maybe some sort of puzzle or challenge could have been created for each base, just to spice things up a bit. Finally, the Path of Legend story is all about exploring and fighting titans with Arven. Now, this one honestly struck me as some sort of weird side quest thing that was added just so that people would be talking about the giant Pokemon for a bit of free advertisement. But as I played through it, my heartstrings weren't only tugged, they were ripped out. This whole storyline is about finding healing herbs. For you, this means that you get to upgrade your rideable box art legendary, letting you do things like ride up walls or glide around. But for Arven, this means healing his terminally ill dog. Yeah, children's game by the way. I went from hating this questline to absolutely loving it. Arven is by far one of the best written characters in this game in my eyes, and we finally have some sort of storyline with a motivating purpose attached. The entire world in Scarlet and Violet feels so fleshed out and full of things to find. Some of this can be accredited to the fact that it's a Pokemon game, so there are Pokemon littered about absolutely everywhere. But a bit of exploring will reward you with items, TMs, these little guys, whatever they are. There definitely could be a few extra cool things to find, but overall each area nails the whole open world thing. Big luscious fields of grass, the contrasting abandoned desert areas, breathtaking snowy mountains that even lead off to beautiful flowery areas. Each different area feels so nice to explore without overtaking the main focus of the wild Pokemon. Now the cities, they're a different story. While at first glance, some of them can seem huge and filled with stuff to do, it's almost like a big cardboard cutout. You can't go inside the majority of the buildings. They either have nothing at all to offer, or you're just met with a menu where you can buy stuff. This is so underwhelming considering that in most of the older games, you could go into every single building, interact with the families inside, hell, you'd go through their bins and find some random items inside. It wasn't just optional to explore cities, it was encouraged. Real thought was put into hiding little things in them to find, and this just isn't really the case in Scarlet and Violet. Thankfully, there are a load of people walking around to make the city feel full of life, but maybe life isn't the right word to use when everyone looks like a robot. This is a general game problem, but it's especially visible in cities. The further away things get, the lower the FPS drops. It's really noticeable in the people walking around because of how many there are, but this is also something present throughout the entire game. A lot of the textures in these cities are awful too. They honestly look like they're from a 30-year-old game and don't even manage to match with the characters or Pokemon models. It really feels like Game Freak wanted to do some big cities but didn't really manage to make them good in any way, shape or form. And this is really weird because some of the smaller cities look amazing. I think the cities that have more of a village atmosphere about them do so much better than the big overwhelming ones with crayon drawn buildings. Like many things are within these games, the cities are so polarised by having some elements that are fantastic and then some elements that just kind of ruin them. The design of the gyms also felt pretty lazy. This is a fully 3D game. Why for the love of Christ are we making big rectangular blocks for every single gym? Why not incorporate some unique designs for each gym type? Bug types can have some cool nests around them, water could have a bunch of cool water features flowing off, grass types could have vines and leaves and stuff growing around it. It's small additions like this that would go such a long way in these games. While some areas are great, others feel so void of any kind of personality. No, that's low-hanging fruit. The mechanics of the game have stayed the same as ever, only this time we have the new gimmick, terrestrializing. I have never been too fond of these gimmicks in Pokemon games. They come across to me as, well, gimmicks. Often they're just plain off nostalgia or involve some kind of favoritism too. Charizard is constantly one of the lucky few that gets to do stuff like Mega Evolve, because that's going to sell well, everyone loves Charizard. But this time, every single Pokemon gets to use this gimmick, and without it being the thing that the game sells itself on. Each Pokemon has a new typing called a Terra type, but the great thing is that this doesn't really overtake any of the normal mechanics of gameplay. Only when you choose to terrestrialize them, which you can only do once between every Pokemon Center visit for a single battle. This adds a whole new level of strategy to the game, because you don't want to waste it if you know that you're going to be battling a few people in a row. And you also want to make sure that you're terrestrializing the right Pokemon, based on the overall matchups in that battle. It does kind of suck that it was only utilised in core battles, like with your rival or the gym leaders and so on, because I'd have loved it for some kid to terrestrialize a Quagsire or something into a Dragon type. Scarlet and Violet's Pokemon are overall really fun in my eyes. Each of the first evolution of the starters are fantastic, but this guy becomes a humanoid and this guy becomes this. So I'll take the crocodile this time around. The Pokemon's designs feel like they had a lot of love put into them. A puppy made of dough that evolves into a baked loaf of bread dog, a lizard bike that fits in with the whole legendary lore, and look, it's me! And not only were the Pokemon designs great, I honestly really liked the character design of basically everyone in the game. Each of the team's star members had a unique look to them, the teachers all looked good, the gym leaders were amazing and really captured the feel of their gym types. But of course, the one we see the most is ourselves. We got to customize our character in this game, which was really fun, and is why I have purple space buns. But the only letdown was that we couldn't really customize our clothing very much. Other than hats, socks, shoes, and so on, we were stuck with 4 preset options, which makes sense with the whole school theme thing, but still feels kinda sucky. Much like a middle-aged married man, the big letdown of this game was undoubtedly its performance issues. I can't express how annoying this is because it ruins so many great things about this game. I love that it's a big open world, but to have that I need to have FPS drops, visual bugs, gameplay bugs, random glitches, even the occasional freeze. A lot of people are blaming this on the Switch rather than the game itself, and while the Switch definitely is in dire need of an upgraded 2.0 version, or even a completely new and different console that is backwards compatible, we can't just use this as a scapegoat here. So many other open world games run just fine on the Switch, and while it would definitely help if the console was more powerful, this one is down to the game itself. It is nowhere near finished. It needs so much optimization, and that extra layer of polish, and honestly should have stayed in development for a while longer. We just had Legends Arceus less than a year before this game was released. It's pretty obvious that there was not enough time given to Game Freak here by the Pokemon company, which is why I don't want to blame them too heavily. A spring or summer release would probably help to iron out all the creases, while also probably giving time to improve some of the other things we talked about, and honestly, I think it would be enough to make it one of the best Pokemon games out there, rather than something that does really feel like an early, unfinished version. While playing, I noticed a bunch of visual issues, FPS drops while in intensive areas, the camera clipping through the floor fairly regularly when battling, the lighting being buggy and not working as it should, Nemona becoming telekinetic with a Pokeball right at the end somehow. And while these are pretty annoying and kind of ruin the experience a bit, there were some genuine problems that I found with the game. At one point, I essentially got stuck in a Team Starbase because I accidentally got in without activating the cutscene by the gate, and every time I tried to leave, I'd trigger a cutscene telling me to get out, and then putting me right back inside the base again. Another time, I used the helpful feature of asking Nurse Joy where to go next. Again, this is because there isn't really anything telling you what it recommends doing next, and she kept telling me to go and do the Dragon Titan. Slight problem, I physically couldn't get to that part of the story yet without being able to swim. There were times when doing the star bases that it became really f***ing difficult to play. I'd be spamming the button to let my guys out and fight, and it felt like my character was frozen, while the world around me moved in slow motion. And one of the most annoying things that I absolutely hated was being repositioned after accidentally triggering a battle in the wild, which is pretty damn frequent too. The hitboxes are awful for this, and sometimes the game will just decide to position you right off a ledge, so that's fun, enjoy getting back up there. Overall though, the game isn't that bad. The flaws really hurt it, but it's honestly really fun at the same time. It'll get a bunch of stuff right, and then drop the ball on something really important. It's 2 steps forwards and 1 step back, which, yeah, sucks for now, because the game is held back from what it could have been, but this could be the stepping stone for the franchise into creating more of the good stuff, and learning how to fix all of the bad stuff as well. Scarlet and Violet needed more time, money, and people working on it to fix the problems that the game had. Realistically, it should not have gone out like this, and would have benefited from at least a couple more months in development. There were also a lot of features that either weren't up to scratch, or just weren't there that could have been, and should have been. More stuff going on in the cities, better textures, an actual incentive to do certain things. Hell, I didn't mention it, but there were barely any NPCs that were worth talking to. And my god, we need to get some voice actors on the scene in the next gen. But even with all of these flaws, I had a great time playing it. When it wanted to, the game looked beautiful. I couldn't help but just stand there looking at the world around me. Exploring was an absolute joy because of how it all looked, and man, there were some really nice cutscenes near the end of the game. While the story was mainly shoved towards the end, it was still an amazing story. I loved the final battles, the moment of glory our box Pokemon had, and how we got to learn a lot more about the other characters. As always, the music was fantastic, especially some of the final battle themes, but on top of that, each gym battle felt so much more fun and intense when the music suddenly became people actually singing the tune near the end. This game takes so many good things from Arceus, while also creating a load of new great things on its own, and I really hope that the future installments of the Pokemon series build on what I would say is a pretty damn fun game.